So, this may not necessarily be the idea that you thought we'd be talking about today, but what I wanted to do was go over an article that I saw published on the Hockey Writers and discuss some of the ideas within. In particular, one main idea. Because, of course, you can tell why we're talking about this here. Today we're bringing up some more conversation about players on my favorite teams and whether or not they could swap, because anytime somebody brings up an idea which involves the Vancouver Canucks and/or the Montreal Canadiens, you know you got my attention 100% of the time. Now, just to get things out of the way, before we dive into this trade idea, there are some games on tap that we will need to acknowledge. Obviously, yesterday, the Canadiens beat the Ducks in a shootout. We had discussed the Lane Hutson performance in that game, as well as the prior 6 games before that in a video earlier in today's show. Go ahead, check that out if you want to see some updates on Lane. And today, the Canadiens have themselves the day off. The Vancouver Canucks, however, do not. They play at 7 p.m. in Rogers Arena, and if everything goes according to plan, I think it's looking a lot like Thatcher Demko's going to be playing today. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see about that. Playing him off against a weaker St. Louis Blues team at a 7 p.m. start at home at Rogers Arena sounds like a great move if it were up to me. But it's not really up to me. We'll take a look at what happens later on in today's show. Anyways, today, talking about both the Canadiens and the Canucks, I wanted to refer your attention to a post made on thehockeywriters.com by Matthew Zader. The Canucks should target a couple of defensemen for Nils Hoglander. Take a look at this. It goes over the identity of the Vancouver Canucks and how targeting a defenseman has been one of the main priorities for this team. It's been like that for a while now. And Zader goes out there and writes here at the bottom that the Canucks don't have a lot of assets when it comes to prospects. They seemingly aren't willing to trade blue chippers like Tom Willander and Jonathan Lekkerimäki, so roster players and draft picks will be the currency that GM Patrick Allvin uses to upgrade his team this season. One player that has been bundled in trade rumors is Nils Hoglander, who hasn't scored in 21 games and who has seen his ice time and role decrease recently. Once a fixture in the top 6 alongside Elias Pettersson, Hoglander has been relegated to the bottom 6 and is someone that could fetch the Canucks a top 4 defenseman. Maybe not on his own, but in a package with draft picks or a mid-tier prospect. With that, let's take a look at a couple they should target. Now, just pause right away. This also was talked about on various episodes of Sportsnet 650's Canucks Central show and the postgame show, etc., etc. It's always being talked about, the idea of a Nils Hoglander trade, and whether or not the Canucks could straight up trade Hoglander away for a D-man. And I think the common consensus here is if they could, they would. It's just, right now, Hoglander is at a point where his value is a lot lower compared to where it was, let's say, 6 months ago, and there really isn't much going in terms of NHL trade market action, aside from the goaltenders getting swapped around in Colorado and San Jose, as well as the Jacob Trouba trade. Right now, Nils Hoglander's value is definitely not at the same place as it was when he had scored 20-plus even-strength goals and 36 total points last year. He has 5 points in 26 games this season. He is on pace for a fraction of the overall point production and goal production as he had accomplished in 23-24. Hoglander's playing a little poorly this season, but based off of the updates we have been hearing from NHL insiders, it's very apparent that other NHL teams are looking at Hoglander and saying, hey, this guy had 20-plus even-strength goals last year. He's young. He's only 23 years old. He's going to get better. He's got a lot of time, and he's on a contract till the end of 2028, making $3 million a year. This guy certainly has potential. This guy's certainly somebody we should go out there and target. And right now he's making 1.1. Which is not terrible, but making $3 million a year for a guy who's good for 15 points a season certainly is not ideal, and you would really hope that Hoglander is able to find his game, find himself a spot in the middle of the top 6 of Tocchet's lineup, and start getting those points to go back up on the board. It's just, we had seen this song and dance before, right? A guy is given top 6 minutes, he plays disappointingly in those minutes, he's not great defensively in those minutes, and Rick Tocchet places him down the lineup. The guy eventually gets traded, and you have yourselves an Andrei Kuzmenko situation like we had seen last year. This Hoglander thing is shaping up to be very similar. But it seems like the Vancouver Canucks won't necessarily need a center coming back, they need more help on defense. Which is why we're going to skip over one of the names that Zader goes out there and writes about in this article. He talks about Marcus Pettersson, and look, we had been discussing the Marcus Pettersson thing for so long here, I wanted to go over to another defenseman that Zader goes out there and lists as somebody the Canucks should trade Hoglander away for. Mike Matheson of the Montreal Canadiens. The Habs will be in sell mode again this season as they currently sit dead last in the Atlantic. Veterans will be up for grabs leading up to the trade deadline, and Mike Matheson and David Savard will be at the top of GM Kent Hughes' list when it comes to trades. The Canucks could go after either one, but considering Matheson is 4 years younger and signed for next season at a reasonable $4.875 million AAV, he should be the priority. While he does have a modified no-trade clause that includes 8 teams, given the fact that he plays for a Canadian team already, I am guessing the Canucks are not on that list. The Canadiens would likely want a first-round pick included in the deal with Hoglander, but Matheson would be worth the extra cost. He is a mobile, puck-moving defenseman who has a history of putting up points. Since last year he had 62 points, and while that might be a flash-in-the-pan stat line, he already has 15 points in 25 games this year. Like Pettersson, he has a history with Rutherford, as he too was acquired by the former Penguins GM. A few weeks before the 2020-2021 season, he traded Patrick Hornqvist to the Flyers for Matheson and Colton Seaver. This article then goes out there and talks about the fit. Matheson is a left-handed shot, but he has experience playing both sides, so he could match well with Quinn Hughes until Hronek comes back, assuming a trade is done before then. Right now he is playing alongside a Cayden, who is also a left shot, so he wouldn't have to adjust his game when he arrives in Vancouver. He is also a minute muncher, capable of playing both sides of the power play and penalty kill and providing physicality. Overall, he would be the perfect addition to the Canucks D-core. And ultimately right now, if you take a look at the Habs, Mike Matheson is playing with Lane Hutson on the top pair, which is really interesting because if you were to cut Matheson, you put him into Vancouver, you said, hey, you're going to play with Quinn Hughes, nothing really would change, to be honest. Going from Matheson playing right side alongside a Lane to Matheson playing right side alongside a Quinn Hughes, hey, it's the exact same thing, almost. Almost. But here's the thing, Matheson can play the right side, so if you were concerned about his handedness not really filling a Canucks need, then you might not have to worry too much about that. Ultimately, when everybody is healthy, if you have Hughes Hronek, Soucy Matheson, and then you had Bronstrom and Desharnais, I guess you could say, or Myers, you ultimately have yourselves a pretty stable D-core. Maybe separate Soucy Myers, you do Soucy Matheson, you have Myers Bronstrom, or you wanted to do some offensive stuff, you want to put Bronstrom with Matheson and just have Soucy Myers as a third pair. That ultimately does sound like a good idea. The cost here is also reasonable too. Mike Matheson only making 4.8 for the next few seasons. It's pretty good, considering what he is capable of. But the question is whether or not Kent Hughes would accept a trade like a Hoglander and a first for Mike Matheson. I honestly do think Matheson could go for a little bit more, but I guess it really does depend on how you personally evaluate Nils Hoglander. For me, it's really easy to take a look at his last few games here and say, hey, the guy stinks, the guy's not really being played much, the guy's not really showing up in the minutes that he does get. There's a lot to desire out of Hoglander's game, especially if you were a fan of him last year. But I won't blame other NHL teams for looking at him and saying, hey, he was great last year. He had all this stuff going for him. He's still young. He's got these skills. He's a puck hound. He's a guy who really goes hard on the forecheck. He's got skills. He's got this nastiness to his game that you can bring out once in a while. There are things to like about Hoglander's game, and I certainly think he would fit well in a system like Martin St. Louis. Whether or not Hoglander is able to become a 20-plus goal even strength guy again is kind of unforeseen, but it's still something that I think is interesting enough to talk about. Plus, you could set the record for a really small power play unit with Suzuki, Caulfield, Hoglander, Hutson, and whomever else you wanted to toss out there to make the size stay under 6 feet. But either way, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as to whether or not a Hoglander for Matheson trade works out. I honestly like it because, of course, I'm a biased Habs fan that likes the Canucks more, so seeing one of the better Canadiens guys move over to Vancouver would be great. Also, you have to think about it like, hey, Mike Matheson's #1 role in the Habs has been taken away by Lane Hutson, so is there a chance for Matheson to maybe phase himself out in Montreal so the Habs can get some younger guys? Matheson's 30, signed on till the end of 25-26, so he's certainly not going to be a long-term option for Montreal, but could he be a now option for the Vancouver Canucks? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Article is going to be linked in the description, by the way. And bye.